welcome everyone to my talk. I hope it's very interesting. One thing I will warn you is all of these examples are actually real-world examples of investigations that I have led and been involved in. So everything that you see here is absolutely real, but it has been sanitized, obviously, for national security reasons and so forth. So, to describe a bit of who I am, my background is I deal a lot in critical national infrastructure. I've lectured for CP&I in the UK. I'm also a subject matter expert on water, oil and gas, and nuclear for critical infrastructure. I'm also in general IT security and IoT security. And I mainly am on the offensive side, but I also do a lot of defense because I find it quite challenging, even more challenging. I love to spread the good word. I'm also on one of the House of Lords groups for artificial intelligence, which we meet once a month. And I'm also a think tank expert in the European Union and for the Parliament. Before some of this, I established the network operations, security operations, joint international intelligence teams, and the EU and UK GDPR group for Aramco and Saudi Aramco. And before that, lots of script kidding and Air Force Space Command, because I like to keep it exciting. All right, so this one's going to be just a bit of some of the introduction to some of the challenges that we have actually seen in the EMEA region, specifically the EU and East Africa. And one of the things that we have to discuss is there are certain regimes and terrorist groups that need to fund their income in some way, shape, or form. And when economic sanctions are put in place, they are actually quite costly to try to monitor and enforce, and also set up a lot of interesting loopholes that have to be closed on a constant basis with lots of diplomatic meetings, lots of lawyers, lots of paperwork. And it's very uncomfortable. Now, in the middle of this, in the European Union, we are about to implement something that is called the European Union General Data Protection Regulations in May, and all 28 member states are supposed to be participating in this. And it's one of these things, if you operate anywhere near the EU, you will be affected. And if you think you don't, this is actually a peering policy for an autonomous system that belongs to KPN Netherlands. And I highlighted peering in Europe requires peering in the US whenever possible. So even if you don't think that you're a data processor or something's going through or you don't have an office, if you have any telecommunications line or anything's going through you from Europe, you actually need to look at the EU GDPR. Lucky you, right? Yay! Why are sanctions important? One of the places that I have lectured, and this is kind of odd, is Urenco is a nuclear enrichment company which is owned by 3 governments. And what they do is they enrich uranium gas to the point where you can use it at a power plant. Right? And there's only certain grades for power plants versus weapons. Weapons way high. Power plant, you can get away with about 7%. And Urenco Netherlands was the place that Dr. Khan stole the plans for the centrifuges. 2 years ago, I was lecturing at Urenco Netherlands, and in my course was a Dr. Khan. I did have to ask him if he was any relation, which he was not, but it was very odd, very funny. But one of the things that Dr. Khan did was spread nuclear proliferation and also sell some of these plans on the black market and to various not-so-nice regimes at times, right? And so out of that, we have had some new agreements, one of which is called the Wassenaar Agreement, which is arms, nukes, spyware, surveillanceware, monitoringware, and so forth. Because even spyware and surveillanceware, if it's dual use that you can exploit, you don't really want that exported to a maybe not so nice country or place, right? So that makes sense, right? So we have the North Koreans. Now, the North Koreans, they have a whole lot of sanctions on them. Good news is for them, last week, the Russians have announced that they refuse to recognize any sanctions placed on North Korea and are again buying coal, the coal that China supposedly is no longer buying. They do a lot of different things. They even have a restaurant chain around the world where their employees are locked in the building and only kind of stay there, live upstairs, and then they serve really bad Korean food. It's not very tasty, trust me. They have some tourism, but that's been less and less because of various events. But they do have a lot of Chinese tourism, which is quite popular. Another thing that we found, because I spent some time in East Africa, was the particular location in Tanzania is very well known for ivory smuggling, and we found that they were operating a few things out of Tanzania. And one of the reasons is, I was called down to do an investigation at this mining exploration company who dealt with gold, platinum, and uranium. And what this particular group was going after specifically, because they also left artifacts, which I could trace back, and also I had verified that were Korean, but North Korean, with certain indicators from the dialects. And they were trying to steal the GIS data for the uranium exploration. And at the same time, they went ahead and planted some Bitcoin mining on the machines. Now, the only thing that stopped them from taking the uranium exploration data from Tanzania was the fact that the bandwidth was so low, so small, that they could not get these GIS pieces of data through, because these are like 650 megabytes on up. They're layered files. And it could not exit. They could get in, but they couldn't get the information out. So it was the only saving grace. But yeah, it was very, very interesting how they attempted to do it whilst also trying to fund their regime. And another thing I should mention is the last time I was there, I also found out that to fund their regime, they are giving private military training to terrorist groups in certain parts of Africa. You want to learn how to make a bomb? You're not a legitimate group? You can call them up now. And they really do love cryptocurrency. It used to be in the past that they would get caught smuggling gold bars or ivory, but usually nothing would happen. There would be no arrest, but it would be taken from them. How can you carry a bunch of Bitcoin, a bunch of cryptocurrency? Hard drive, phone, anything with a bit of memory, right? So now it's also changing in that respect, and they're able to move more and more funds around in that manner because of it. So they no longer have to carry these big things of gold, right, or ivory or whatever. And they also love extortion. This is a very, very serious concern because of some of the ransomware that hit the European Union, and I believe also the United States last year as well. So how do I include the EU GDPR? And I do want to give a bit of an explanation for those that are not familiar with kind of the European mindset. So I live in Amsterdam, and I live, about 20 minutes walk from the Anne Frank house. And one of the things that the Nazis did when they invaded the neutral country of the Netherlands was the Netherlands had a lot of data about their citizens. So they registered their citizens, they had their ethnicity, their religion, where they had come from, some of their family information. So as soon as that data was available, it was misused by very naughty people. And so we have, unfortunately, things like the Anne Frank house, right? And this is one of the reasons why between that and the Stasi, that it is a concern. My grandmother was actually born in East Germany and smuggled out through in the trunk of a car. And she had East Germany on a birth certificate. 2.5%, it was estimated, of the East German population from these age ranges were basically turning in their neighbors, turning in their loved ones, their spouses, their parents, their children. So Europe has a very different view on privacy. One of the reasons for the European Union is so that hopefully World War II, World War I wouldn't happen again. So it's not just over, sexy bits. I like cats for some reason. But here are some of the very important articles, they're called. So lawfulness, is it legal to collect? I've got consent. Do you know what kind of data you're collecting and how it could possibly be used? You also have basically anything that can identify something extra special about you that you could be discriminated against. And there's a lot of coverage. It has to be transparent. So the end user licensing agreements that you have in the United States are not legal. with this. It has to actually be human understandable from now on. So that's a requirement now as of May. You can be the right to be forgotten. And this is a very interesting one. They actually put in the wordage that you not only have to secure your stuff at a basic level, you actually have to demonstrate it, which is quite interesting. Now, there can be consequences when you create regulations and laws. And the consequences, if you break this, can be quite powerful. It isn't just the percentage, it isn't just the level of the fine, it's also the fact that if you are a company, you all of a sudden now have to open up all of your books because they want to see what your worldwide income is. So would you want to do that with a European regulator? It's going to be very costly, very expensive. Oh no. Right? So as soon as we found out about this coming down the line, when I was at Aramco, we actually started setting up a group and established it because they did not want their books to be open. And that's understandable. They are owned by the Saudi Arabian government. So they aren't just like Shell or something like that. So it's very different. There's also a whole lot of loopholes, which very interestingly, I believe there's 27 or 28 listed in one of the articles. It can vary from, you are not allowed to collect basically anything from a 13 to 16-year-old or under. Also, some countries have a 13-year-old or under, so no more tracking kids. But also, if a country thinks that their democratic process is being threatened, or if there's economic issues, or for the preservation of their country, they can actually just do away with this for that time being. So there's a lot of them. But what's interesting is, it has now left a very, I don't know if it works, a very, very interesting area where extortion can take place. Now, what's nice about this is, I realized if I could find a company that was spilling out a certain amount of personally identifiable information, and I knew that they could be fined, and I knew that they would have to open their books, and if I was a bit naughty, which I am, and I wanted to extort them, right, I could just say, listen, we think that that fine might be about, I don't know, €1 million, we'll take half. And when I thought about this, I went ahead and last year I had the privilege to help lead the European Union cyber warfare exercises in Brussels last June. And we went ahead and put this into part of the scenario, which involved ransomware and extortion. And what it involved, because the European Union is very, very afraid right now. We have got Russia on one side, which isn't very friendly. And we have the United States who will not affirm if they will agree to the NATO sub-Article 5, which means if one of the NATO members comes under attack, the rest of the members will come to their aid. Now, during 9/11, the rest of the NATO allies came to the United States' aid. Mr. Trump will not reaffirm it. And because this is such a worry, part of the master scenario, the big one, involved a speech by the President of the United States. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have discovered that our European allies and friends have been under attack with catastrophic consequences. However, when I visited them, I told them, I warned them that they needed to increase their military expenditure, and they did not. Now is the time for Europe to stand up on its own 2 feet. American blood should not be spilled. God bless. And God bless America. So what happened for the master one, because we build up to get them used to it, and what it comprised of was a minister of foreign affairs from each member state, as well as a few ambassadors. And ministers of foreign affairs are like your State Department. And we also had folks who led cyber commands of various countries as well. And the scenario starts, the telecommunications are hit. There is some massive extortion. The banking is taken out. One of the stock exchanges is taken down. Government websites causing panic, stock exchange as well. But here's where it gets interesting. In this scenario, because we also have to be aware of critical infrastructure, which is all around us. Don't we love electricity, right? Clean water that we can drink. And so in this case, there was some exposed critical infrastructure, and they were able to close a storm surge barrier, which caused a major container ship to capsize and kill all the sailors. Then they caused electricity blackouts, which ended up, in the scenario, causing a lot of damage and ending up killing people. It also, in the scenario, exploded some transformers. And then at the very last bit, the London Underground became under attack, and the attackers caused the trains during rush hour to collide into each other. So we're quite concerned about some of this, as you can tell, right? And the interesting thing is we can base this on reality, all right? So depending on your membership, not everyone is a nuclear state within NATO. Some don't admit. And so we allowed the diplomats and the ministers and so forth to decide, assisting them. They could do nothing, right? They could say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Kick out some embassy people, leak some information about someone in their government. There's certain things. Declare solidarity, which obviously we would love the US to do, but that's another story. In the Netherlands, currently I believe we're the only country that can legally hack back on any device anywhere in the world at any time that we feel like it. And that's been that way for about 2 years, 2.5 years. You can declare war, and of course, nuclear deployment. So to be a little dark, the night before we had the major exercise, staff and I were discussing how far we thought that the participants would go, and we actually, over some wine, made a little bet to see if we could get any of our groups to use nuclear weapons. I'm pleased to say, my group, I convinced them to launch a nuclear weapon in the upper atmosphere of the attacking country, which happened to be North Korea, and take out all of their infrastructure. So we're quite concerned. And I think if it's at that level, it's very, very concerning. The reality is, these types of things do happen. And that is a bit of a shame. These various groups and regimes still need to fund their stuff, and they're going to do it in many, many different ways. So the reality is, this is why I could not carry this presentation here, because telling them I have a Saudi visa. This is an email from ISIS. This is another case that I was involved in where, yeah, they didn't even change like from the scent. It's from ISIS. Isn't that nice? This is from ISIS, right? So what happened was a particular embassy in a European city several years ago, they had some very weak email security. Their password on the embassy email, I believe, was 123456, right? And so an extortion email was sent by that embassy to a few other embassies in that city to say, we want 25,000 euro from each one of you, coming from an official embassy website or email. That's not good, right? Nor is 123456. So most countries will have a separate type of police department that handles diplomatic affairs, a diplomatic corps, diplomatic police. Because you can, if you're inside an embassy, you can shoot somebody and kill them in full public view, and a police officer cannot do anything because it is sovereign property of that country. There's nothing you can do. So to help out, and I've made this mistake myself, the diplomatic folks got involved and went ahead and sent out a warning letter to all of the embassies. Well, at the time, we did not know that the attackers still had a forwarder on the email hidden way in the back of the account. So when the diplomatic police sent this warning, over the past several days, several embassies have reported to us extortion attempts. If you get any of these, please contact us. Well, this allowed the attackers to get all of the official embassy email accounts and then sent to all of the embassies and back to the diplomatic police a demand for $50 million And the threat was there was a very high-level diplomatic event involving over 400 diplomats, including the ambassador from Japan, the ambassador from the United States, United Kingdom, you can go on, their staff. And they said that they would attack and destroy it. Privately, the city went on a bit of a freeze because there was all this going on until we were able to close everything up, kick them out, and secure the location and work on a plan with that particular country's national terrorism. So any kind of way that they can to get money, they do. Before they were known for their lovely beheading videos, they were extorting European companies through kidnapping and so forth, big time, and it had been going on for years. But they actually can use things like weak credentials to cause a lot of damage. Because of this, I was actually also put on a high-value kidnap list for ISIS. And so that was, I didn't tell my husband for 2 years because I didn't want to scare him. But yeah, these things happen, right? So one of the last ones I'm going to show you, and I would love a lot of questions, is this one is very interesting. I'm in green. And we'll just say that this is Zakistan, Arania. And they were kind enough to contact me starting last year with some very, very interesting requests. They wanted me to come out and specifically teach them how to break into critical infrastructure and nuclear facilities. Complete with a VVIP tour to take me around with pictures, propaganda pictures, to meet people, and a 6 figures for 1 month's work. Isn't that nice? This is this year. And so here's a funny one. So the very next thing, I tell this person, if my company was bigger, unless you're aware of any possible EU companies that I could indirectly work for or a neutral location. I'm doing a talk on how a totally different economically sanctioned country finds funding loopholes next month. Okay, please let me know. I don't want to work for the Zaka Iranians. Yeah, I don't want to be in jail. So these types of things actually happen, unfortunately. Luckily, I don't do everything for money. But there are some solutions. Absolutely. Preparation. I also found out in the Urban Dictionary, don't get a RAM code, meaning don't lose all of your systems because you didn't do any security. All right, don't do that. Everything can be vulnerable. And one of the key things is preparation as much as you can, because it really isn't if, it is when, okay? They're going to find any possible way that they can, and the more stuff that is connected, hey, why not, right? They still need to buy stuff, like that Scotch brand that guy likes, that kind of stuff, and fly Dennis Rodman over. So there are solutions, and I also wanted to point out that from these events, have the new OWASP 2017. The key ones that cause these events, A3, sensitive data exposure, that's a bad one. Security misconfiguration, and you would think an embassy would do this. Insufficient logging and monitoring. They'd never even... They're using Microsoft Security Essentials. So, yeah. Going back to basics can help. Understanding that you might have a particular threat profile if you have money or data, because that's now very, 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 very valuable, is data. That is like, robbing a Bitcoin exchange at this point. So be aware. And also, not everyone's perfect, right? So last summer, I taught a course at Security B-Sides on how to find critical vulnerabilities in the CIA, GCHQ, NSA, and the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The NSA was nice enough to fix this particular vulnerability within 8 hours. But they themselves had a vulnerable asset up that was vulnerable to actually a crypto attack, which would have been a little embarrassing. So be aware, no one's perfect, right? But it was the best response I've ever gotten from responsible disclosure. Man, I'm telling you, I told them that night, by 10:30 in the morning, everything was fixed. It was great. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Basic security testing, just keep it simple. Sometimes if you try to overcomplicate things or get that mystery magical box that some vendor says can do everything, it also nowadays still needs to be audited to make sure that it can do the things that it promises and it's not sending data this way or that way or automatically profiling an individual based on some special thing, gender, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. I also highly suggest knowing who you can get help from. Because if a large event occurs in your organization, your company might need some help to bring it back up. There are other people's jobs on the line, for example, and you don't want your company to fail. So they can help, and they also have a lot of good material. And one of the things that helped us was at the time, part of the time when I was at Aramco, the Dutch cert wasn't really ready for private business. So we went ahead and leveraged Luxembourg, which has possibly one of the best certs I've ever worked with. They're called the Circle team. And we went ahead and put a couple of DNS servers into racks to be able to be a constituent. And then we had a particular event that involved the North Koreans and a nuclear facility, and they were able to help us out quite a bit as well, because we needed some additional assistance immediately. So they can be very, very helpful. So get to know where you can get some help, because the last thing you want to do is if you lose everything, like at the Aramco situation, they had everything on SharePoint, they had nothing printed out, so who do you call, right? So don't be that. Don't get Aramco. So it can be done. Definitely keep it simple. One of the best ways is if you do collect any of this, try to anonymize it. And that's probably the quickest and cheapest way. You can do that with scripts, all sorts of things. And that's one of the things that we did at Aramco as well. Obviously, include both of these things, especially the fact that we know that extortion is getting worse and worse. And unfortunately, I advise everyone to have some Bitcoin ready, because if you're in a situation where maybe even a cert might advise you, they're only asking for a small amount. But I don't agree with that, personally, because we've seen in Sweden a couple of years ago, they did a similar thing to part of the telecom system. And the Swedish, I think it was Sweden, the government kind of pressured them to pay the ransom, and then the group was like, okay, give me more. And you don't want to be in that situation. That's how like a lot of blackmail occurs, always more and more and more. All right, because they know you have the money. So I put some resources up, and also stress, be careful who you do business with. I put in the US cert. This one is very good. It comes out of Europe, and what they have is for free. All of these exercises, something like 37 exercises complete with virtual machines. They have a student edition and a teacher edition. So one module could be getting to know your law enforcement or something like that. Yes, sir?
Would you be able to get a copy of these slides so we don't have to
Yeah, you guys, yeah, because you guys have them. Yeah, they have them. Oh, no, I was pointing to the OWASP people. They're recording everything. Absolutely. So I found this very, very good. Fantastic resource. And another one that you might not have heard of over here, this one is called the Malware Information Sharing Platform. And what it does is it collects the newest and greatest malware hashes from certs around the world, and you can actually feed those in before antivirus is available. So it can give you an edge, and it's free, and it's on GitHub. So it's great. You can kind of stay ahead to a certain extent, especially if your risk profile is a bit nation-y statey. So, you know, that can help. So, in closing, oh, I guess that didn't work. Anyway, Shit happens. IT's in it. They might be after you, as well as this is some of the subdomains I found. They changed it after I reported it to the NSA. Those were actual subdomains. Yeah. You got to have fun with security, right? You know, there are a lot of resources that are available out there. So you don't have to have this huge spend. It is out there, all right? So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And now I am ready for questions and eager. We got a question back here? Probably shout.
I'd love to shout. Test. Cool. Very interesting talk. Thank you so much. Other than the usual suspects, your Russias, your Irans, your Chinas, your North Koreas, who do you see as being sort of the threat that we should be most worried about? And if that is cybercrime, what do we do when the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies are frankly tapped out and they're really not necessarily going to give us the time of day?
They have been rather tapped out, which is a bit of a concern because a lot of governmental organizations have been leaning, quite frankly, a bit too heavily on like U.S. CERT to kind of take care of security for them, which is a bit of a problem, all right? It depends on your risk profile. So most organizations are going to be facing a lot of stuff from cybercrime, any way that they can make money. So you might have the ransomware, extortion stuff like that, or moving into seeing if they can find something that they can extort you for, right? There are other organizations out there that operate very large crimeware systems. For example, in Indonesia, probably the world's largest biker gang comes out of Indonesia. They actually have a complete network that runs, and they take advantage of the fast bandwidth in parts of Europe to stage their stuff from. So it isn't, you know, just them or the scarier people. There are a lot of little groups out there that want to fund and come up with money, and those, I would say, they've refined it to a very high skill level because that's how they're getting a lot of money. So most cases, I'd be more worried about that, except if your risk profile includes a bit more of this. But random, like ransomware and hitting low-hanging fruit, that's easy. They'll also participate in that. So trying to take care of some of your low-hanging fruit, check out your stuff on like Census or Shodan or whatever, do a quick, search, and then you're probably going to meet a good basic level. That's my advice. Questions?
Hi, I'm curious if you know, did these regimes turn to these crime techniques after the sanctions were implemented and they could no longer make money in the legitimate way? And is that kind of complicit there?
Yeah, it's one of the shifts. And so there's various ways that when you apply economic sanctions on a country, they'll start branching out. And it's just now we have the joy of the digital world that makes it a lot easier to do, right? Definitely. See one back there?
Yeah, thanks for sharing the GDPR extortion example. My question is related to if somebody actually considered paying that and delaying delaying information going to the EU GDPR, is there anything in the GDPR that would increase their risk or right?
There is, on top of the EU GDPR, there's also a system per country where the data commissioner of that country can, if you've been very, very bad, stop you from ever exporting or importing data to that country again. So you'll lose something called a data transfer certificate. So you're basically stuck in that country, which would be very, very bad. So that's one of the more extreme penalties. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just wondering how all this is enforced. Does the EU have to take these, just how's it enforced does you have to take them to court and then there's a long drawn out legal battle, or
No.
they can just do it from a regulatory?
Regulatory.
And they have enforcement. They have
Yes.
actual resources to be able
Yes.
to.
Well, not everyone. I don't think, say, Albania is quite ready yet. The Netherlands is. The United Kingdom certainly is. They actually started finding people, and they had their own set of rules about 2 years previous. So they've already had that enforcement. They've been fining like £1 million in one case. So they're already there.
After Brexit, will they still be doing the?
Well, they had their own original law. So what they're probably going to do is shift back to that. At least that was the indication I got from the Information Commissioner about a week and a half ago in the UK. Questions?
With all of the data living in the cloud now, how can the EU regulators really keep up with it? I mean, Microsoft Azure is everywhere. Data is everywhere. Microsoft doesn't necessarily even know where it is. It's just in their cloud. So it could be in Ireland, it could be in Israel, it could be in Indiana. Who knows where it is? So how is that effective? And if the EU decides to clamp down on someone, how can they? And I'm not trying to pick. Just how would one stop it from?
Well,
spreading
that's
around?
a very good question. One of the things that cloud providers like Microsoft have now agreed to is any of the European data, you actually have transparency where your data is actually stored. And if they break that, then that's a violation. However, in reality, we all know that data moves a little bit of everywhere, right? So it's a bit of a problem. They're going to have a very big job. There's going to be a lot of new lawyers, a lot of new lawsuits. So I see this as being very problematic. There have already been member states who have kind of asked, can we delay this because we definitely are not ready. We don't have the enforcement resources, or we might have just set up an information commission with 5 people. What are you going to do with that? You can't do much, right? So there are already reservations, and I believe from some of the talks I've attended that there will be a more friendly transition period, so they aren't going to try to hammer you right away. But I'm sure with very egregious situations they would. Yes, sir.
Do you have any suggestions for U.S. companies that operate digital services globally, and EU citizens essentially use those digital services, but they're typically a U.S. company? Suggestions on how to prepare for GDPR, and what's your sense of when there's going to be a bellwether case where a U.S. company is going to be actually brought in front of GDPR and the articles that you mentioned?
Absolutely. One of the ways that they've already been kind of restricting things in Europe is, are you an EU resident or citizen or not? And so that is put into a different container or database so that it's only stored a certain amount of time, and it might be anonymized in a different way. So they've already started planning for that. And that is a good suggestion if you have that option, because that's perfectly legal to ask, are you an EU resident or a citizen? Because when I try to buy certain things here, oh, you must be a US resident. Well, I'm not, right? So that's perfectly legal. The second part?
Yeah, just do you have a sense of like maybe a bellwether case that might be upcoming?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, a lot of U.S. businesses, GDPR almost seems a little bit far away. But the
Yes.
EU citizen test seems to bring CEOs' attention. It's like, what do we got to do now?
Yeah, exactly.
In light of GDPR and, of course, the prevailing legislation in the United States, which is GLBA, which has traditionally been kind of the U.S. privacy law.
It's probably going to be a biggie because there are several governments that are currently investigating Facebook, and one of them is the Dutch, because they also have a separate thing for 13 and under, which is now illegal to track, and a few other small bits. So personally, I think they would go after a bigger company that has the funds first.
Deep pockets.
Right? Wouldn't you? Right? So I'm going to have to wrap up because I got the wrap up sign. It was a pleasure. Thank you also, OWASP, for bringing me out here and hosting me. And I'll be available for any other questions right after. Okay? Thank you.